risk is one of my favourite subjects. So first of all, we're going to talk about how you initiate the project risk lifecycle. Initiation is the stage where you look at what you're doing, you work out who's going to do it, you work out how you're going to assess your risks, and I'll link above to my video on assessing risks. You also need to work out where you're going to store the information. You need to work out what kind of risk register you're going to have, how often you're going to have reviews. All that sort of thing is in the initiation stage, and that is during the planning phase of the project lifecycle. Once you've initiated the process, then we get onto the meaty bit where you actually start identifying risks. Now, these next few phases are iterative. This means that you do them over and over again. The initiation phase that I've already talked about, you only do once. You only start the project once. The other thing about the initiation phase is that if you're in a company that does risk regularly, they'll already have a set out way of doing risk, a set out tool set, a set out set of measures, so you know how to assess your risks. And it makes it a lot easier. Now, on to the next phases, and this is where it gets interesting. You then have the next 4 stages: identify, assess, plan and implement. So this is where you look at the risks, you work out how you're going to deal with them, you deal with them, and then you look to check if there's any more risks. So identify. To identify risks, generally there's loads of different ways of doing it. Just brainstorming, you go and talk to subject matter experts who've done similar projects, you go and look at the records and the lessons learnt and the risk registers of similar projects which are finished. Just sit there and think about what things might go wrong. So it's really easy at the beginning to start identifying risks, but it starts getting harder when you start needing to assess them. So the assessing phase is when you look at the likelihood of the risks occurring, but also the impact they're going to have. This is where you need to get real practical skills, and you need people who really understand the work you're doing within your project. You get them to help you assess it, but also, if you're the risk manager, part of your job is making sure that across the board all the risks are managed on a very similar scale, because you may get someone who catastrophizes with their risks and you need to just temper them down, but you may also get someone else who goes, it's nothing, it's barely a risk, when actually it needs managing. So this is where you make sure that everyone's risks are being looked at equally. And if you've got an area with less or more risks, you need to look at them and go, is that because they're less risky, or because the person managing that area doesn't look at risk in the same way as other people? Once you've assessed your risks, now remember, you don't need to do all the risks at the same time. You may find as you're assessing that you'll identify the risks, and those risks will need to go in and start being assessed. But once you've assessed your risks, then you can start planning what to do next. What you plan is called risk responses. Now, there are quite a few different risk responses you can do. There's avoid, reduce, transfer, accept. So if it's something that you just know you can't do anything about, like a nuclear explosion, then you just accept it. If it's something you can transfer to your customer or transfer to a supplier, then you might do that. If it's something you want to avoid, again, you just avoid it. Maybe if you're building a train line, to do a very black and white example, you build a train line. If there's a rock over there, you just build the train line round. It may cost a bit of extra money, you put that in there, but actually in the long run it's easier and quicker. Then you may also have opportunities in this risk register. When I use the word risk, sometimes it actually means risk and opportunities. It's anything which may or may not happen. It doesn't actually mean whether it's bad or good, but risk as a word can either mean both risks and opportunities, or it can mean risks as in negative risks, and then opportunities are positive risks. It gets a bit confusing, and it's worth understanding that people use it in both ways and clarifying when someone uses the word. If you've got an opportunity, you can exploit, you can enhance, you can share, or you can reject. So, for example, if it's an opportunity that you just don't think you can fit in, you may decide to reject it and go, we don't need that. If it's something you just going to accept because it might happen, it might not, but you're not too fussed either way, you'll just wait and see, then you'll accept it. But then you may decide to exploit it. Say, for example, you get offered a chance to go on TV to talk about your project. You may decide that you want to exploit it. You want to really go on there, share it on all social media, make sure it happens. Maybe, for example, you're entered into a draw where you may get to be on television, and there's a chance you might be interviewed by someone famous. You may just accept this and go, if I get interviewed, it'll be good, and I'll just go with it. If I'm not, it doesn't matter. You may decide to exploit it. So you go in and you go, I'm going to be at the front, I'm going to try really hard to get interviewed. I may even go and talk to one of the runners and see if I can get special treatment. Or you may decide to reject it and go, actually, you know what, I don't want to be on TV at this point, I don't want to be asked any different questions, so I won't actually even turn up. Once you've planned the risk and decided how you're going to deal with it, you then need to implement these responses. And remember, the way you decide to deal with a risk, the way you plan it, may create new risks of its own. So for example, you go on telly and then there's a risk you'll say something stupid. So you may add that in as a new risk, even though it's kind of a risk on a risk. It all depends how you want to manage it. So lastly, it's implement responses. This is where you actually do the things you plan to do. And the thing about this stage, again, you may find new risks appearing. You may find other risks being more likely to occur because of the way you've implemented your responses. And it will cycle round between all of these 4 stages until, well, the end of the project. So, what do you think of my definitions of the project risk lifecycle? Do let me know, comment below, and goodbye!